In this video, we are going to learn an important aspect of quality control, which is validating the data being typed into a specific cell or range of cells. And we're going to be using the data validation tool to do this. In the following example, I'm creating a salesperson expense claim sheet, and I need a way to restrict the data that a user can add according to particular parameters. For example, we want the following validations: the salesperson ID, the client name, and the type of expense can only come from these pre-existing lists. The date must be a date within the 2016 year, and the amount has to be between $1 and $1,000. And if a user is trying to input information which does not meet these criteria, it should be rejected from ever being entered. And since I'm using a table over here, I simply need to create the data validation rule in the first cell, and as this table expands, so the data validation rule will expand. To create the rule, we can move to the Data tab and across to Data Validation. And that launches the Data Validation dialog box, of which there are 3 tabs. The first is the most important, since this is where we actually create the data validation, choosing from many different types. For example, the most common that we would probably use is the list, since that allows us to choose items from a pre-existing list. However, in this example, we'll also see the date as well as whole numbers. You can even use formulas by using custom, an example which we'll see later on in the series. We are now going to choose from a list, and once we make that selection, we get the option to choose the source. I'm going to select all of these items in the list and hit enter. And as you can see, we have the options for ignoring any blank cells and creating an in-cell drop-down selected. Now you'll notice that when the cell is selected, we have this drop-down, and that has all of the items from this list. If we try and type something that's not in this list and press enter, we see we have an error returned saying the value doesn't match the validation restrictions that were created. Clicking retry will allow us to try again. In addition to simply creating the settings, we can also add things like an input message or an error alert. As we saw, when we typed a number out, we got this particular error alert, which can be customized in the data validation dialog box. And a better way of accessing data validation, instead of the data ribbon, is to use the keystroke of Alt, D, and L. And let's now have a look at how we can use an input message to perhaps provide more information to a user before they actually attempt to type out information. So over here we can call this perhaps ID, and we can provide the user with an input message requesting them to please provide their sales ID. Furthermore, under the error alert, we are able to choose the type of error that a user sees and the style of error, of which there are 3: stop, warning, and information. The stop error will actually avoid the user ever inputting that information, whereas the warning or the information will allow that information to be input into that cell. However, the user will see the particular error message. We're going to leave this set to stop. Now clicking OK. If we select this cell, as you can see, we get the title of ID, and the description says please provide their sales ID. Now let's go and create these data validations for client name and type of expense more quickly. I'm going to use Alt-DL, choose settings. I'm going to use the tab key to move down to the next option, and then simply type L for list, once again hitting tab, and now the source is this list of client names, pressing Ctrl-Shift down and hitting enter. Once again we can test that, and it's working great. Type of expense, once again Alt-DL, tab L, tab, and select our 4 types of expenses, and we now have that validation created. The date validation was any date within the 2016 year. So we're going to press Alt-DL, tab. Now we're going to choose date, and the starting date must be 1/1/16, and the end date being 12/31/16. And do notice that you can make selections other than between. Now if we were to try and put a date within 2015, we get the error that we would expect. And lastly, let's create a validation for the amount of between $1 and $1,000. Alt-DL, tab, and we can choose any whole number or any decimal, and make sure that the minimum is set to 1 and the maximum is 1,000. So having any negative numbers will return the error, as well as having numbers above 1,000. I'm sure you can see the application of data validation within your day-to-day work in Excel, and how it can help you to make sure the information that other people put into your spreadsheets are accurate and valid. We'll see you in the next video.